A man walked into a small bakery on Pine Avenue, looking out of place amid the long line of customers in a rush. Grey hoodie, messy hair, worn-out canvas shoes, he looked just like an exhausted college student searching for a bit of caffeine to survive the day. But when he ordered a blueberry muffin and a cup of black coffee, the first thing that made him pause wasn't the price. It was the hesitation in the eyes of the girl behind the counter as she picked a muffin from the tray. She was scared, not of the customer, but of what she was selling. He took a bite, and instantly, something inside him shattered. Not because the muffin tasted terrible, but because it was his muffin. His name was Ethan Granger, founder of the Muffin Street bakery chain. A man who started out with a tiny muffin cart 12 years ago and a dream. Every muffin is a reminder of what's still good in the world. But the muffin today, dry, bland, with a chemical aftertaste, felt like a slap straight to his soul. And worse still, when he gently asked, "Is this muffin fresh?" The young woman, barely in her 20s, glanced around, then whispered, as if afraid someone might overhear, "No, sir. It expired 2 days ago, but the manager told us if we complain, we'll be fired." Ethan said nothing, but something inside him broke. He had no idea what had happened during the 6 months he'd been away caring for his sick father. He didn't know who was now running what he once called his second family, and he couldn't have imagined a hidden hand quietly pushing his company off a cliff, waiting to devour it. That day, when Ethan walked out of the bakery, he was no longer the famous CEO with the top floor office. He was a father, a founder, a man, beginning a silent investigation to save the very soul of something he'd built with his own hands, now poisoned day by day. And what he uncovered wasn't just spoiled food. It was a deliberate scheme aimed at killing an entire legacy. That afternoon, Ethan sat in silence in his car, right outside the Muffin Street bakery, the place where every dream had once begun. He looked through the dusty window and saw scratched plastic tables, flickering fluorescent lights, and an employee wiping the same countertop over and over again, even though there was no dust left to wipe. Her name was Lena. He saw it on her name tag. She looked about 22, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, but still trying to smile when customers walked in. That crooked smile. Ethan had seen it before, in the mirror, many years ago, when he first started selling muffins in the biting winter cold. Ethan had seen that same crooked smile. He didn't know exactly what made him come back. Maybe it was the bland taste of the muffin. Maybe it was the sad look in the young server's eyes. Or maybe it was that whispered sentence, "If I keep protesting, I'll be fired." And almost instinctively, Ethan returned to the counter. He spoke gently. "To be honest, this muffin isn't right at all." Lena froze for a moment, then looked around, leaned in close, and whispered, "I know. I'm sorry. But they make us sell expired products. Some of these have been out for 3 days." Who's they? The new management. They say throwing things out is wasteful. I used to speak up. They threatened to fire me. Ethan was stunned. Muffin Street, the place he once trusted to hold the belief that quality is integrity, was now nurturing exactly what he'd fought against. Lena, voice trembling, continued. We used to be trained on how to check ingredients, how to bake properly. Now, we're just told to stand at the counter, smile, and sell whatever's left. If a customer finds out, we're told to blame it on shipping delays. I used to believe this company was different, but now, it's everything I feared. Ethan asked softly. How long has this been happening? About 6 months. Since the new manager came in, she leaned a little closer, her voice nearly breaking. You know, one day, I had to use cream cheese that had already gone moldy. I knew it was wrong, but my mum's in the hospital. I couldn't risk losing this job. Ethan took a deep breath. Inside him, a feeling he had never quite known before began to rise, a mixture of rage and shame. He didn't tell her he was the founder. He only said, "Thank you for being honest. Don't stop doing that. Someone might be listening." And as he turned and walked out of the bakery, Ethan knew this was no longer about a muffin. It was a warning sign, a silent rot, spreading deep into the sugary shell he'd once so carefully built. Ethan pulled out his phone. Quietly, he took photos of the muffin display, recorded the time, noted the condition, and wrote down the employee's name. He was no longer just a customer. He had returned in another role, a man searching for the truth. That night, in his 38th floor apartment overlooking the city of Seattle, Ethan couldn't sleep. The numbers from the financial reports, the growth charts, suddenly felt meaningless. On his computer screen, he reopened emails from the board of directors, memos about cost optimization, centralized production models, eliminating underperforming staff. Lines of text once seen as operational strategy now read like an indictment. Not a campaign against waste, but a systemized slaughter. The next morning, Ethan put on a cheap suit, round-rimmed glasses, and carried a fake portfolio with a business card that read, Marcus Gray, Operations Efficiency Consultant, Efficiency Solutions, Inc. When he walked into the headquarters of Muffin Street, the very building he had once designed to feel warm and human, no one recognized him. Not even Patricia, his longtime assistant, who merely looked up and returned to typing. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? I'm Marcus Gray, invited by the board to assess operational efficiency. From that moment on, Ethan became an outsider in the very house he built. An hour later, he was sitting in the conference room across from Marcus Hicks, the company's chief financial officer, and once his closest ally. Marcus smiled with pride as he presented, "We've cut ingredient costs by 37% over the past 8 months, reduced production staff by 60%, and centralized all baking operations to a single hub." "What about quality?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "People still eat it. They don't notice. The point is, profits are up." Marcus shrugged and poured himself another coffee. "Customers don't care where the ingredients come from. As long as it smells like butter and stays cheap, they'll keep buying. And employees, they just need to know how to smile and operate the register." Ethan clenched his fists. Every word Marcus said felt like a knife to the heart of someone who once believed, if you want to make a difference, it starts with every grain of flour and every human soul. What about the in-house training programs, skill development? The culture of customer care, Marcus scoffed. All gone. Now, staff get 15 minutes of training, take orders, sell, upsell, and stay silent. Ethan asked, who's behind this entire strategy? Concord Equity. Marcus said bluntly, they're our biggest investor. They want returns, not ideals. Everything Ethan once believed in just slowed the cash flow. The name Ethan leaving Marcus's mouth was like a pronouncement that he had died in the very company he had founded. And inside Ethan, something had never been more clear. This was no longer a matter of management change. It was a calculated coup, a ruthless transformation, where the soul of Muffin Street had been replaced by indifference, where employees had become tools, customers were seen as targets to exploit, and ethics were nothing more than an unnecessary cost. Ethan nodded slightly, pretending to jot down notes. But in his mind, a decision had already formed. If someone was burying his brainchild alive, then he would be the one to dig it all back up. The glass elevator carried Ethan, still in the role of Marcus Gray, up to the 27th floor, once the proud nerve center of Muffin Street. He had once dreamed of a space filled with natural light, soft music, and the scent of baked goods drifting through every corner. But now, it was nothing but harsh white light, expressionless faces, and a factory-like silence as sterile as an industrial assembly line. Ethan entered the conference room, where Marcus Ricks, the company's CFO, was already waiting, holding a thick stack of financial reports. "Welcome, Mr. Gray. I've prepared this quarter's data for you," Marcus said with a professional smile and a self-satisfied gleam in his eyes. Ethan nodded, opened the report, and his heart pounded harder with each line of figures. Revenue was up. Expenses had plummeted. Profit margins exceeded expectations. But something didn't feel right. How can you reduce operational costs by 37% without affecting quality? Marcus chuckled, as if the question were too naive to deserve a serious answer. Supply chain optimization. We cut out the small vendors, switched to industrial ingredients, extended shelf life, centralized all production instead of letting branches bake on site. As for staffing, cut by more than half, ovens, bakers, quality control processes, all unnecessary luxuries. Ethan pretended to take notes, but his hand clenched tightly around the pen. And customer response. Customers are still buying. Mr. Gray, Marcus shrugged. And the staff. Those who don't like it, leave. Those who want to keep their jobs know to stay silent. He spoke as if employees were just bolts in a machine easily replaced at will. I thought Muffin Street used to have a philosophy, the baker is also the storyteller. Oh, that was Ethan Granger talking. We do real work now. Ethan wanted to laugh, but the sting inside him kept him silent. Even his name had been turned into a joke, something from the past best forgotten. So who's directly responsible for these changes? Marcus smirked. L. Harding, the current CEO. brought in by Concord Equity, a top-tier cleanup expert. Cuts every excess emotion out of the business model. Ethan nodded, heart heavy. He had once believed that stepping away for 6 months to care for his father was the right thing to do. But it turned out, the very moment he turned his back, they had changed the locks, erased the soul, and transformed Muffin Street into a profit-churning monster devoid of feeling. After leaving the conference room, Ethan quietly made his way to the data center. There, he logged into the system using an old admin credential, luckily still active, and what he saw wasn't a mistake. It was a scripted performance. All premium ingredients, organic flour, free-range eggs, imported coffee had been replaced with the cheapest alternatives. Veteran bakers had vanished from the employee roster. And the Muffin Street Culture Handbook, which Ethan himself had written years ago, had been replaced by a single A4 sheet sales metrics, KPI, and a no-disclosure policy. He dug deeper, and then paused at a familiar name, L. Harding, CEO, previously Concord Equity, restructuring specialist. He had found the link, and maybe the puppet master behind it all. Ethan sat in silence, surrounded by an office that once symbolized dreams. Now it was just a morgue for everything that had once been good. Ethan sat alone in an unmarked, windowless office, the glow of his laptop screen casting harsh light on his face, calm, tense, but with eyes that burned bright. He was no longer the founder who had been overthrown. He was a man who had just spotted the first incision. In a wound festering beneath the surface, the first file was the ingredient order list. Ethan scanned each product code and discovered organic flour gone. Free-range eggs replaced with industrial grade. Imported Arabica coffee disappeared, swapped for a premium blend that cost a third of the original. He scrolled down to the staffing expenses. The names of the people he had trained, skilled bakers who had been with the company for over a decade, were no longer there. All replaced by a wave of entries labeled entry-level, training not required. But what made Ethan leap to his feet, heart pounding, was when he opened an email from Concord Equity to Marcus and L. Harding, we must prioritize profit. Eliminate anything unprofitable. Quality, emotion, tradition, all burdens. Customers don't notice. As for staff, always replaceable. Ethan sank into his chair. For the first time in his life, he felt a chill run down his spine, not because of the numbers, but because he now saw the truth. This wasn't a company anymore. It was a machine engineered to kill the human spirit for profit. He kept digging, and then a name appeared like a curse. Lyle Harding, the current interim CEO. He clicked open Harding's internal file. 8 years with Concord Equity. Specialty corporate restructuring, cost optimization, short-term profit maximization. Internal nickname, Clean Sweep. The one who wipes everything out. Ethan swallowed hard. He remembered the board meeting he had missed the day his father passed away. He had trusted that he could step away to grieve and that the company would be in good hands. But in reality, that very day, The board had held a secret vote appointing Lyle as acting CEO, a silent takeover, and the cruelest part since then, Ethan had been kept, in name only, still receiving curated reports, still invited to token meetings, still signing documents already edited before they reached his desk. He hadn't been fired. He had been kept as a figurehead to cover up a corporate takeover. And finally, when he accessed the internal email chain, Ethan read a subject line that froze his blood. Phase 3. Prepare to activate mandatory buyout clause. Buyout clause. Ethan frantically searched for the original agreement signed when the company accepted Concord's investment. And he found it. A clause buried deep in Appendix 47C. If company valuation falls below 60% of its peak value for 6 consecutive months, Concord Equity reserves the right to initiate a full buyout at the current valuation. Ethan sat frozen. Muffin Street had once been valued at $180 million, current internal valuation $94 million, just $4 million away from the threshold. They weren't destroying the company out of incompetence. They were doing it on purpose to buy it back for pennies. And then what? Sell the real estate, liquidate the equipment, erase the brand, redirect profits to other ventures. Muffin Street wasn't their first victim. Ethan traced back Concord's investment history. 7 other companies had been dismantled in the exact same pattern: invest, restructure, degrade, buy out, sell off. He leaned back in his chair, hands over his head. A long, aching silence filled the room. Not because his company was about to collapse, but because he realized if he didn't act now, Muffin Street would become nothing more than a name on a death certificate. The message came at 3 a.m. No name. No title, just one line. Mr. Gray. This is Lena. I know you're looking into things. I have something you need to see. Can we meet, Ethan? Paused mid-scroll through an open asset valuation sheet. He read the message again and again, as if it held a key, the only key that might unlock the door, rapidly slamming shut in front of him. He replied, Pioneer Square Park, 6 p.m. Tomorrow. Come alone. Pioneer Square Park, in the light of spring evenings, always glowed gold through the old oak trees. Ethan sat on a wooden bench near the totem pole, a spot with a wide view and an easy exit if things got out of hand. He wore his old grey hoodie again. The identity of Marcus Gray was now more than just a disguise. It was the only shield he had left. 6 o'clock sharp. Lena appeared. No uniform, no name tag. Just a young woman in an oversized sweater, clutching a large envelope as if it might fall apart if she loosened her grip. You're the only person I trust, or at least the only one who's actually listening. She sat a safe distance away, eyes wary but resolute. What I'm about to give you could cost me my job, or make me disappear. Ethan nodded slowly. And I promise you won't have to pay for your courage. Lena opened the envelope. Inside were photos of moldy pastry trays being reheated for resale. Inventory logs marked cream cheese, Expiration 2 days. An email from management. Do not discuss ingredient sources. Any violation will result in immediate termination. I thought it was just our store, Lena said, her voice catching. But then I contacted a friend at the University District location. She was forced to use spoiled yogurt to make smoothies. When she refused, they put her on a performance improvement plan code for waiting to be fired. Ethan flipped to the next photo. A tub of buttercream with visible mold, a loaf of bread with rat bites, and next a screenshot of an email from Janet Chin, an employee at the Bellevue branch, reporting violations to the city's health department. Lena spoke quietly. She was fired the following week, labeled as violating internal confidentiality. They even called local restaurants to block her from getting hired elsewhere. They can do that. Money, connections, lawyers. Ethan sat in stunned silence. What lay before him was no longer just a string of operational failures. It was a tightly organized system designed to eliminate dissent. Lena pulled the last document from her sweater pocket, a printout from the internal company website, under the section titled Branch Performance Rankings. There was no metric for customer satisfaction. Only 2 performance indicators: waste reduction score, WRS, based on how much expired product was repurposed. Compliance rating, CR, based on adherence to corporate directives. Branches that used the most expired ingredients got rewarded. Managers who enforced policies strictly got promoted. This is a contest to see who can poison customers the best, Ethan whispered. And the ones who stay silent the best, Lena added. She finally looked up at him for the first time since she arrived. I used to think this company was different, a place I could be proud to wear the uniform. But now, every day I go to work, I feel like I'm betraying myself. And I'm scared, not of getting fired. I'm scared that one day I'll get used to this. That sentence cut straight into the deepest part of Ethan's heart, not because Lena was wrong, but because he had once felt the same way. He took the envelope of documents, hands trembling, but his eyes were blazing. Thank you. From now on, you're not alone. Lena gave a faint smile, then stood. Before leaving, she turned back. I searched the name Marcus Gray. No LinkedIn, no company, no one knows who you are. So I figured, maybe you're the only one who actually cares. And if I'm wrong, at least, I tried. She walked into the dark, and Ethan remained holding in his hands the evidence of a toxic system that had burrowed deep into the company's very core. Tomorrow, he would begin to fight back, and those who thought they had already won would learn one thing. When the prey is silent, it doesn't mean it has surrendered. Returning to his apartment near midnight, Ethan sat surrounded by the documents Lena had just given him. The coffee had gone cold. His laptop screen was covered in images of moldy products, falsified reports, and email threads that cut through the founder's soul like blades. Ethan looked up, his eyes blank, staring at the ceiling. He had no choice now. Either he acted immediately or watched Muffin Street be auctioned off brick by brick. At 3 a.m., He dug back through every original contract, the ones he'd signed 5 years ago, when Concord Equity became a strategic investor, and there, tucked into a tiny clause in the founding charter, a clause the lawyers once laughed off as idealistic nonsense, he found exactly what he needed. Article 12, Section 3. The Values Protection Clause. If the company's executive leadership acts in direct opposition to its declared core values, including product quality, professional ethics, and employee welfare, the founder reserves the right to temporarily revoke board authority, call for structural reorganization, and restore the original mission. Ethan laughed, not out of joy, but because he had written that clause in a moment of youthful passion. And now, the very clause once dismissed as wishful thinking was the last sword he had left to wield. 5AE. He dialed a phone number he hadn't used since 2018. Jake Morrison, Seattle Times. "Who's this, Jake?" "It's Ethan Granger." Silence. Then a sudden noise, his coffee cup hitting the desk. "Ethan. Holy hell, you're alive. I need you to write the truth. All of it. And I've got something that'll land you on the front page for weeks. By early morning, while the city still slept." Ethan began compiling a thick dossier. Title: Restoration Plan for Muffin Street, exposing the Concord Equity takeover operation. Each section was clearly labeled. Evidence of expired food being reused. Internal emails threatening employees. Falsified financial reports. Lease records connected to Concord shell companies. And finally, indications of planned devaluation to trigger the buyout clause. He added an attachment, a list of 23 employees terminated for policy defiance. Each name, each date, voices that had been silenced. The plan read like an indictment, and at the end, he printed the original Values Protection Clause, notarized on the day Muffin Street was founded. Ethan sent the entire file to his former attorney, Susan Kim, the one who had helped him incorporate the company. She responded within 20 minutes. "If what you're saying is true, Ethan, you just found a nuclear bomb. And I plan to detonate it at exactly the right moment," he said. 7 a.m. Sunlight filled his small kitchen. Sarah, his wife, walked in, coffee in hand, eyes still heavy with sleep. "You stayed up all night again?" Ethan just nodded. She looked at him, quiet for a moment, then gently asked, "This time, what are you going to do? Take the company back for the people who deserve it, and end these vultures feeding off a brand they never built?" Sarah gave a soft smile, then rested her hand on his shoulder. "Then end it," Sarah said. "But this time, don't just take back the company. Take back the faith you once lost." Ethan looked at his wife, then at the thick dossier on the table. He knew the real battle would unfold at tomorrow's board meeting. And this time, he wasn't walking in as a CEO. He was stepping in as the founder, the protector, and the last living witness of the original dream. 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes before the board meeting began. Ethan's phone screen lit up with a breaking news alert. breaking Muffin Street under investigation for alleged customer endangerment, employee intimidation, and falsified financial records. Source: the Seattle Times reporter, Jake Morrison. The hashtag Muffin Scandal started trending rapidly. Ethan didn't smile. There are no victories marked by relief, only a quiet sense that the timing was right. He straightened his tie, picked up the thick briefcase, and stepped into the boardroom, once his sanctuary, now steeped in bleach, new leather, and betrayal. At the round table, David Crane Concord Equities representative sat at the center, face stone cold. To his left was Lyle Harding, the interim CEO, the man who poisoned the company with a corporate smile. The rest, the board members, were murmuring, checking their phones. The news was spreading. The tension was thick and unmistakable. Ethan pulled out a chair, sat down, looked each one of them in the eye, then calmly said, "Good morning. I hope you've all read the morning paper." David Crane slammed his palm on the table. "You're behind this leak, aren't you?" "It wasn't a leak," Ethan said, opening his leather case. "It's the truth, and here's the evidence." He began laying it out piece by piece on the table. Photos of moldy food, copies of emails threatening staff, a list of 23 employees fired for policy defiance, shady sale contracts tied to Concord's shell companies. "David." Ethan turned to him, his voice cold and precise like a knife's edge. "Would you like to explain why Concord is secretly acquiring the 3 most profitable branches at bargain rates through a shell corporation named Pinnacle Development?" David's face went pale. But before he could respond, Ethan switched on the projector. A PowerPoint slide appeared on the screen. Muffin Street Acquisition Plan, internal only. Phase 3. Degrade. Depress. Acquire. The room fell silent. Line by line, the strategy unfolded. Lower quality. Drive valuation to minimum. Trigger mandatory buyout clause. Resell assets. A board member, Robert Chin, spoke up in shock. "You made us accomplices in destroying this company, and we didn't even know." Lyle sprang to his feet. "These documents are fabricated. You have no authority to be here." Ethan smiled for the first time in 3 months. "Really? Allow me to remind you of something." He pulled out a carefully framed document, its paper slightly yellowed, bearing a certified notary seal. "Muffin Street Charter, Article 12, Section 3, Values Protection Clause." He read aloud, each word landing like a judge's gavel. "In the event that company operations contradict its mission of quality, ethics, and employee welfare, the founder reserves the right to temporarily revoke all powers of the board to restore core values." No one said a word. Lyle was sweating. David's brow furrowed. Margaret, another board member, flipped through her copy of the charter, and just then, Susan Kim, Ethan's attorney, stepped into the room carrying an official folder in her hand. "I represent Ethan Granger. The necessary filings were submitted to the state office this morning. Under corporate statute, as of this moment, Mr. Lyle Harding is stripped of all executive authority." All contracts signed during his interim tenure will be reviewed, and any board members found complicit in willful sabotage may be subject to fiduciary breach litigation. David leapt up, red-faced, slamming the table. "You can't do this." "We have binding contracts," Susan replied calmly, without even looking up. "And your contract prohibits any action that damages the company's integrity or operations. Serving expired food and firing whistleblowers might have pushed that a bit far, don't you think?" At that moment, David's phone buzzed non-stop. Concord Equity had just been placed under investigation for financial fraud and investor deception. Lyle Harding lunged forward. "This isn't over." Ethan stared him down. "You're wrong. It's just beginning. And this time, you won't get the chance to erase anyone from the system again." Security entered the room. Lyle was escorted out. David quietly gathered his things, trying to maintain composure, but unable to hide the weight of defeat. A few board members bowed their heads, and Ethan, the man once dismissed as a sentimental relic, remained seated, gazing at the empty chair at the head of the table. That seat had just returned to where it truly belonged. 3 weeks after the liberation of the boardroom, Ethan stood outside the Muffin Street branch on Pine Avenue, the place where everything had begun. The glass doors gleamed, the signage had been replaced, and beneath the brand name, a small line shimmered under the morning sun, baked with integrity. Nung Bang Tri Team. Inside, Lena was leading a training session for new employees, her face glowing with confidence. Nothing like the worn-out girl who once sold expired muffins in silence. "Remember," she said, her voice clear and steady, "if the pastry doesn't meet our standards even slightly, we don't sell it. Even if we have to apologize. Even if we throw out the whole batch, honor can't be measured in profit." A young employee raised his hand. "What if a manager pressures us?" Lena smiled the kind of smile no longer weighed down by fear. "Then you call me directly. My number's in the handbook. Here, everyone has the right to say no. And I promise someone will stand with you." Ethan watched her as if seeing a reflection of himself 12 years ago, not just a girl in an apron, but a flame keeper. That day, Ethan invited Lena to a small cafe near company headquarters. He handed her a white envelope. Lena opened it and froze. A certificate for 5% ownership in Muffin Street. I can't accept this," she said, stunned. "You're not allowed to refuse," Ethan replied with a soft smile. "You saved this company's soul when I had lost my way. You did the right thing when everyone else stayed silent. You deserve to be part of what comes next." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. In the 3 months that followed, Ethan visited every single branch himself. He met with every person who had been wrongfully terminated, restored their salaries along with a handwritten apology, appointed those once labeled troublemakers into leadership roles. He called them the root holders, because they were the surviving roots, what could help the tree grow again. Concord Equity attempted a counterattack, filing a lawsuit for breach of investment contract, but it was too late. The judge dismissed the case. the securities board launched a formal investigation. 3 other companies previously cleansed by Concord reached out to Ethan for legal support. Even former employees of those companies wrote letters thanking Muffin Street for having the courage to stand when everyone else stayed silent. The campaign, baked with integrity, launched across the entire network. In it, every Muffin Street employee shared why they chose to return, not for the money, but because they believed the work meant something. Lena's story, where she said, "I just didn't want to lie to myself every day anymore," resonated with millions. The video hit over 2 million views in a single week. Thousands of comments poured in, customers sharing how they had once been disappointed and now wanted to come back to believe one more time. Revenue surged by 43% in the first month alone. But Ethan cared more about another number: employee retention rate, up by 91%. That evening, Ethan sat on the steps outside the Pine Avenue store, beside Lena. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "Just 3 months ago, I thought I'd be fired for telling the truth. Now, I'm teaching others how not to be afraid." Ethan nodded. Sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to speak first. A soft breeze swept through the street. The scent of real blueberry muffins for the first time in a year filled the air again. Ethan didn't just reclaim his company. He reclaimed something he once feared had gone extinct in the business world: kindness. And not long after Muffin Street returned under Ethan's leadership, something happened he never expected. The phone rang in his office. On the other end was a young woman's voice, trembling but clear. "I'm the CEO of a tech firm in Portland. Concord Equity just invested in our company. And after this morning's article, we need guidance. How do we avoid becoming the next Muffin Street?" Ethan paused for a few seconds. Then he said, "You don't have to fight alone. Within 10 days, 4 more companies from entirely different industries reached out. All had either interacted with, were negotiating with, or had already signed deals with Concord. Some of them were just beginning to recognize the signs of that sweet deception. Staff layoffs masked as optimization. Core values quietly sacrificed to meet market demand. A creeping realization that they were being replaced by a lifeless model. Ethan launched a confidential support network, Founders Against Predatory Equity. There, he shared a template for the Values Protection Clause, encouraging entrepreneurs to embed it into their founding charters as a kind of emergency release valve. He told his story not as a hero, but as a survivor. On the side of Concord Equity, the collapse began one piece at a time. David Crane and 2 senior executives were indicted for securities fraud and internal coercion. Lyle Harding, once the firm's iron hand for corporate takeovers, became a wanted fugitive for money laundering and tax evasion. Latest update, he was being extradited from the Cayman Islands to Seattle, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) froze all Concord Equity operations for 6 months pending full investigation. A wave of class action lawsuits erupted from former employees of companies previously devoured, with Muffin Street's case file used as the lead precedent. At a press conference held by the Department of Justice, a senior official declared Muffin Street proves one thing: with enough evidence and enough people willing to speak the truth, even the most seemingly untouchable empires can be brought to their knees. That day, Lena was teaching new hires how to detect the scent of properly baked muffins when Ethan showed her the video of the statement. She looked at him, eyes brimming with tears. Did we really make a difference? Ethan smiled. Not just for our customers, but for people who've never even set foot in a Muffin Street. And slowly, each old wound began to heal. Janet Chin, the employee fired for reporting moldy food, was invited back as a regional director, along with a public apology from the company. All 23 employees on Lyle's blacklist received letters inviting them to return, along with an offer to purchase stock at a special rate. Half of them came back not for the paycheck, but because the dream was still alive. One former employee said in a company video, "Back then, I was labeled a troublemaker. Now, I teach others how to speak up, because here, being brave is no longer a flaw." At the end of the month, Ethan got a message from his journalist friend, Jake Morrison. That tech company in Portland just cancelled their deal with Concord. They said, "We're choosing the harder path, but the right one." Ethan, you just saved a company that never even met you. Ethan looked at his phone, then out through the window at the city of Seattle. He knew he hadn't saved the whole world, but at the very least, he'd stopped a part of it from being swallowed. That evening, the Muffin Street store on Pine Avenue closed after a long day, not because of poor sales, but for something more important: a weekend training session just for new employees. A new tradition where those who had survived the crisis passed on what was right. Lena stood on a small platform. Behind her, a handwritten sign. "We don't just bake muffins, we keep promises." Has anyone ever wondered how a muffin could change an entire company? A few young employees giggled. Lena held up a small muffin. Because it carries responsibility. It's not just flour and sugar. It's the customer's trust, the baker's effort, the founder's philosophy. Then her voice softened. And if one day someone pressures you to do something wrong, remember, Muffin Street nearly died from silence. And it was saved by someone who dared to speak. Ethan stood behind the counter, not interrupting, not giving a speech. He simply poured coffee quietly, as if he were just an old employee, visiting the place he once called home. When the training session ended, Lena walked over, carrying a tray of freshly baked muffins. First batch made by the new team, not burnt, not undercooked, not missing a thing. Ethan took a bite, closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, not because it was delicious, but because it was right. 3 months later, Ethan hosted a small gathering just around 40 people on the rooftop of the company headquarters. No press, no live stream, only the ones who had kept the flame alive through the darkest hours. He raised a glass of water and spoke in a low, steady voice. There's something Concord never understood. Profit can sustain a business, but only trust can sustain a mission. He looked over at Lena, now the director of system-wide training, then to Janet, and the former employees once cast out, now seated in the front row like warriors returning from battle. Today, I'm not celebrating a company that survived. I'm celebrating a culture that endured, a circle that has closed, and a new generation just beginning. Silence followed, then applause, slow, steady, like the rise of a muffin in the oven, warm, measured, full of meaning. That night, Ethan returned alone to Pine Avenue. He stood at the exact spot where years ago he sat with a laptop, a cup of coffee, and a dream. But this time, he wasn't planning expansion. He was writing something greater, faith. Inside, a young new employee was wiping down the counter. When he spotted Ethan, he gave a quick nod, then held up a thumbs up. Mr. Granger Muffins today hit the 6.5-minute mark, just like the training manual said. Ethan laughed. Not because it was naive, but because truth was being passed down in the most ordinary, beautiful way. On his office desk now sat a small, familiar item, an old bronze alarm clock, the one from his very first muffin truck. He reset it to 6 a.m., the hour of his first store opening back in 2012, and every morning, when that bell rang, he knew no matter how much the world changes, true values always return on time. In a world where greed is disguised by balance sheets, where numbers drown out narratives, and optimization becomes another word for betrayal, Muffin Street, a seemingly humble bakery chain, did something that once seemed impossible. It chose to stand on the side of people, not with slogans, not with million-dollar marketing campaigns, but with quiet courage, from a young employee named Lena, who dared to speak the truth, with bitter awakening from a founder who thought he had lost everything, and with collective resolve from those who had once been cast aside, now returning to rebuild the foundation. Justice doesn't arrive in armor, it arrives in silence, through carefully preserved emails, through every spoiled muffin thrown out at the right time, through every moment a young employee says no to what's wrong. They didn't change the whole world, but they stopped a monster from growing inside their own house. If you've ever been someone called too idealistic to survive in business, dismissed as unrealistic for actually listening to your staff, or sat quietly in an office, knowing something felt wrong but unsure if you had the strength to fix it, remember this story. Remember, a single bad muffin can bury an entire brand, but one brave soul can save it all. Because sometimes, the only way to beat those who play dirty is not to play like them. 3 months later, Muffin Street opened a brand new location on the very first brick laid in its foundation. Ethan wrote by hand, "Here, we don't close our eyes. Not out of fear, but because we've already awakened. If you've ever been underestimated for doing what's right, if you've ever stayed silent because you thought you weren't strong enough, then remember, sometimes one person standing up is enough to teach an entire system how to be human again. And if today you are that person, don't give up.